This is Over the Top, Under the Radar, a weekly look at the stories in the news that are overreported and those that are going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough. This week, we have the brilliant Nadine White co-hosting. You might remember Nadine from previous episodes of the show. She is a journalist, filmmaker, and the editor of Blackcurrant News. Thanks for joining us, Nadine.
Thanks for having me, Carys. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, always a pleasure to talk to you. So tell us about Blackcurrant News. The last time you came on the show, you were still a journalist for The Independent. What's changed?
Yeah, so it's been a busy month and a bit since stepping down from my role as race correspondent at The Independent after just under 5 years in that position. And it was a great 5 years. You know, it was a huge responsibility reporting on the stories that I did. And, you know, it's not all responsibility that I took lightly at all. I'm very proud of the body of work that I produced while there and the stories that I told. And just after taking some time to reflect and towards the beginning of the year into the summer, traveling and, you know, just thinking about next steps, it felt like the right time to step away from not just my role as race correspondent, but daily news reporting altogether, in order to focus on long-form storytelling and filmmaking. So that's what I am up to. And in addition to that, or as part of that, I should say, I soft launched Blackcurrant News, which is a news platform focusing on stories within and around Black and minoritized communities. And the response to that has been phenomenal.
I mean, every time I go on your social media, I feel like you've won another award. So I think it was worth saying, Dean, you were the first ever race correspondent for The Independent. Won, I think, 30 to watch. You got a Media Excellence Award recently. You've made an amazing film called The Barrel Children about those kind of left behind by the Windrush scandal. So basically, you're getting to expand into all of the kind of journalism that you were sort of doing on the side of your other job. I was always really impressed that you were like, I was like, how does she do all this and work for a national newspaper?
Yes, a lot of the times it felt as though there were not enough hours in the day, just lots to cover, lots to do. As you mentioned, you know, producing the film, Barrel Children, The Family's Windrush Left Behind, which performed really well following its release in 2023. And I've been touring with the film for the past couple of years. I'm actually working on part 2 of Barrel Children, so that's taken up a lot of time. Thank you so much. So yeah, been doing a lot. And, you know, I've always loved telling the stories that, you know, that I've always focused on, the stories that we don't often hear about, generally speaking, as far as the national news agenda. So to be given awards on top of that, you know, that's a bonus.
And so you mentioned Blackcurrant News. If people want to follow that and follow you, what's the best way for them to get involved?
Sure. Well, yeah, I'd like to encourage anyone listening who wants to learn more about Blackcurrant News and subscribe to Blackcurrant News to visit www.blackcurrantnews.co.uk. And there are different types of subscriptions that can be taken out as part of the package that we're offering readers and subscribers. You will receive a weekly newsletter giving you a roundup of various news items, you know, again, affecting Black communities or of interest to Black and minoritized communities. And there will also be a lot of original reporting.
Okay, great. So all the stuff that we love that you used to do at The Independent, we can now get it directly in our inboxes.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll put it in the show notes as well, everyone. Blackcurrant News, watch this space.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we've both taken a look at the news agenda and picked 2 stories that we want to talk about this week. One that's over the top and one that's under the radar. And I thought maybe, Nadine, you could start with your over the top for the week.
Yeah, when I was looking at stories that I potentially speak about this week, there's quite a few things that came up. But one story in particular that jumped out was the Met Police recovering thousands of stolen items in a crackdown on organised shoplifting gangs. So as part of what Scotland Yard describes as its largest ever operation to tackle shoplifting, officers raided more than 120 shops suspected of buying goods stolen from major retailers and reselling them at cheaper prices. 9 shops were ordered to close and 32 people were arrested. So there's been a bit of reporting around this. And I think that it is right, that if there's wrongdoing taking place, if crimes are being committed, then naturally the police should be investigating that. The police said that the recovered goods included branded food, Lego sets, makeup, and electrical devices. And these were worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. The thing for me is that looking at what's been going on with the Met Police in recent weeks, months, well, years really, it grates on me that in the context of what's been going on with the Met Police over the past few weeks and photos of the goods that were retrieved by the Met Police, that this has been highlighted, and it feels like a bit of an aggressive push against small businesses accused of selling these items, and it's been packaged as a major public safety operation, but it feels a bit performative as well, because this is the same force that's sitting on a damning internal report into racism and discrimination within its own ranks, findings that are still being kept from public view. So many of our listeners will have heard that there was a panorama expose into Charing Cross Police Station a couple of weeks ago, and it highlighted just how entrenched and normalized discriminatory attitudes are among police officers, despite Met Police Commissioner Mark Rowley saying that vast improvements are being made. So while the panorama expose was being filmed and the undercover reporter went into Charing Cross Police Station, the Met had commissioned an expert, a HR expert, to come into the Met Police and examine its structures and give some feedback as to why it is that their London race action plan is failing. This expert found that racism, anti-Black racism specifically, is baked into the Met's HR processes. Instead of publishing this report in the public interest and in the spirit of accountability and transparency, the Met Police buried this report, suppressed this report, and the report was leaked to me, and I reported on this in an article for the Guardian newspaper. Despite questions asked to Met Police leadership, the report still hasn't been published, and there's been no satisfactory response to the question of why this report was not published, and they've been sitting on it for almost 4 months now. So it just feels like while they're flexing for cameras over shop raids, they're ducking accountability for systemic rot. It feels like misplaced priorities, and it feels like optics over honesty.
Yeah, it's kind of an annoying, like almost PR playbook thing, right? It's like they've press released this thing, Operation Zoraiden, and it's like raiding 120 shops. And you're right, like obviously stolen goods are bad. People need to know that what they're buying is attained legally and that it's, the brand that they say it is. But like really, like 120 shops that are accused of handling stolen goods. So we don't even know for sure that they actually have been selling stolen goods. And then, yeah, you're right. It's all that kind of macho, like security cam footage and police raiding and that kind of like laddie going in there. Yeah. Meanwhile, there's a lot of unanswered questions. I'd love to hear a bit more about that story you wrote for The Guardian, but I think most people remember the Panorama leak that recently where, it was wild. It was like racism. There was a guy saying something awful about a woman who'd experienced domestic abuse. And as you say, like this has been going on for years, right? If we go back to Stephen Lawrence and like the report that found institutional racism, we've since had reports that have found institutional sexism, homophobia, racism. Like it's sort of this weird elephant in the room while they're press releasing like corner shop raids. Because that's kind of what it is, right? Corner shop raids. There's many corporate criminals that are doing worse stuff than that. But I'd love to know, like, how did you get the report? Like, and I'm sure you have to protect your sources, but like, how did that come about?
Yeah, no, happy to speak about that more. I just want to say that I agree with your take on this particular news item. And yeah, there's a consensus that, of course, it's right that people should be able to buy their goods and know that these goods aren't stolen items. One detail that jumped out at me when I was reading the coverage of these raids is that some of the seized items include own brand Lidl products such as honey, flour, rice and lemon curd, boxes of Nespresso, coffee pods, Starbucks, travel mugs and Waterstone umbrellas. And yeah, as I say, I'm not downplaying the significance, I suppose, of these raids, but I just think that it could be argued that it pales in comparison. It could be argued to the systemic issues within the Mets, you know.
Yeah, I don't feel like. Yeah, I mean, do we feel like we're all sleeping better in our beds at night because the like people that shoplifted from Lidl and sold it on? Yeah, it doesn't quite work, does it? Although branding it a raid makes it feel like, high drama. But yeah, like
we got them,
once you list
guys.
actual things,
thumbs up. It's just,
yeah.
it grates on me. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be reported on at all. But I also think that there needs to be more reporting around, as I say, this suppressed report, Met Police report. And I'll speak in more detail about that. So this review, as I say, it looks at anti-Black racism specifically within the Met Police. And it was commissioned by the Met from the consultancy known as HR Rewired, and the review, which produced the report, which led to the report rather, concluded that bias, racial stereotyping, and inequity were woven through the force's recruitment, promotion, and grievance processes affecting Black staff members specifically. So the report is called 30 Patterns of Harm, a structural review of systemic racism within London, the London Met Police Service. So this was leaked to me, as I say. The Met Police had this report in their possession for 3 months, and there were intentions, as I understand it, initially, before they actually read the report, to publish it. My source tells me that there was a meltdown among the Met's senior leadership when they read the report and saw just how damning it was, and then it was buried.
It's kind of hard to know where to begin with the Met, right? Because they've commissioned this report, which is good. I mean, the bare minimum given the number of scandals and things that we've heard. It's just, it's kind of hard to hear that they still, after all these years and like all these scandals, they still don't want to be transparent, because it's like, it's not a surprise to any of us. And like, this is, I guess, the thing that makes it hardest, right, is the Met is policing a very diverse city with a lot of Black people in it. And how long does it have to go on? And how many times do like journalists like you have to show how systemic like the racism is? I mean, we've heard, the Charing Cross panorama thing was looking at what it was like for sort of people at a particular station, how they talked to one another, how they dealt with suspects. But I mean, sounds like just about an internal thing. It's not even about people that the police are arresting. It's about how people are being treated when they get hired by the Met.
Yes, exactly. And that has a knock-on effect, because it's the culture and the reality within that organization. Of course, it has a knock-on effect on how Londoners, many of whom are from Black, Asian, and minoritized communities, are policed and over-policed. It's all linked. Some of the details in this report are astonishing. So, for example, the review found that performance systems rewarded familiarity over fairness, with Black staff given coded feedback such as, "Oh, you're not quite ready," or "Be a bit friendlier," and penalised for
Be a bit friendlier.
Be a bit friendlier. If you want to get ahead,
wow.
Be a bit friendlier. So it's not about, according to this report, officers' competency.
That's such a classic, like, I don't want to speak for you, but that's like a really classic way that if you're Black or like from a minority, you get treated at work, where it's just this sense that you're not quite a culture fit. What else was in it?
Their officers, Black officers, are often penalised for naming racism. If they experience it or if they witness it, they're penalised because naming racism is seen as a reputational risk for them. Complaints of racism were often recast as banter or personality clashes. Perpetrators were protected, leaving those who spoke up, or who speak up rather, accused of playing the race card or being too sensitive. These are things that, won't come as a surprise to anyone who has been across the concerns raised about the Metropolitan Police over decades, really. But the fact that this review, led to a report that outlines in great detail what's going on, and this report hasn't been published. And worse, the media, for the most part, I mean, aside from The Guardian, hasn't picked up on this either. There's no lobbying of the Metropolitan Police to publish this report is, for me, wild.
At this point, the Met Police is the equivalent of like a school that's failed Ofsted. The idea that you are like known publicly and like nationally for having a huge problem with racism that like is not just down to like one force, is just like systemic and kind of like the rot is throughout your organization. The idea in that context that like Black staff are being told that like not to bring racism up, it's just like, it's like the worst possible response to the problem that they face. I don't know, like, presumably you've dealt with the Met quite a lot over the years. Like what, are they quite defensive? If you go to them with a quote, are they like quite defensive? Are they like what's your impression of like why they don't seem to want to grapple with this?
I think that there is a pervasive narrative among people who are senior within the Met Police that the extent of the problem is a few bad apples and not a systemic issue. I think that's what it comes back to time and time again. And so that,
even when there are reports that tell them the opposite.
Right, exactly. So I think that means that the issue isn't being acknowledged as an entrenched problem within the organization. And I just want to add as well that this review is thought to be the first internal inquiry commissioned by the Met to examine anti-Black racism in its structures, rather than being prompted by individual tragedies or scandals such as the McPherson report in 1999 that called the Met institutionally racist after officers mishandling, also the Stephen Lawrence case. So this is a landmark report that has been suppressed, is being suppressed by the Met Police. And so I would welcome more coverage about that and not so much coverage about the shop raids.
This podcast is funded by our Patreon community, a few hundred people who give a few pounds each month to cover our production costs. It means the show can be independent and that we don't have to chase clicks or advertising. It's a really small team of us that make the show, and we keep the lights on because of our Patreon supporters. Thank you so much if you give via Patreon every month. And if you're considering giving, please sign up today. Patrons get a bonus episode every week, advance notice of special guests, and the chance to suggest questions. You also get invited to our Over Under WhatsApp community where you can connect with other listeners. So for the price of a cup of coffee every month, you can support independent left-wing media. Every single donation really, really counts. To sign up today, go to patreon.com/overthetop/under-the-radar, or just hit the link in the show notes. My over the top is the political and media response to the resignations from the grooming inquiry. So there's a government inquiry into grooming gangs. Those who are paying attention will remember that the inquiry was sort of triggered by an Elon Musk tweet, which then turned into a Kemi Badenoch question and press release. The thing that's happened this week that's getting lots of coverage is there is a survivors panel that is part of the inquiry, and multiple survivors, I think we're at 4 survivors as we're recording, have resigned from the panel and quit over concerns from like how the inquiry's been set up. I think it's right that there are headlines about this. Like, it's a high profile inquiry. Having 4 survivors say that they don't trust the process, they don't trust the inquiry before it's even begun is important. But I think that what we're seeing in the media coverage is like a lot of platforming for right-wing actors who already have an agenda to tell you what this means. So the context for this, you know, I mean, the UK government, the main thing we love to do is inquiries, right? We've got the COVID inquiry going. We've got this inquiry going. I'm a little bit cynical about the extent to which these inquiries ever solve issues or just create a way for us to deal with them in a few years. But this grooming inquiry has already been weaponized by Kemi Badenoch and by right-wing media outlets. And the story that you hear is the inquiry is being watered down. They're not going to talk about race. Like, they're not going to get into like the real truth about the inquiry. So it's important to say that the reason that the survivors have resigned are numerous, but actually, to connect to the thing you've talked about, one of the main things that comes out from like, so we've got 4 survivors who've resigned and some of them have issued statements or public letters. And the consistent theme from all of them is about the involvement of the police in the inquiry and having the inquiry chaired by a police officer or a social worker. So I'm I'm going to quote a couple of the survivors here because I think it's important actually that the women who have stepped down actually have their voices heard. So one of them said, when I found out the two potential chairs were a former police officer and a former social worker, I was shocked and I didn't know how they could be involved. They were both part of a profession that failed us. Another person said, having a police officer or social worker leading the inquiry would once again be letting services mark their own homework. The shortlisting of these potential chairs shows the government's complete lack of understanding of the level of corruption and failings involved in this scandal. And it is worth saying that like some of the survivors have stayed on the panel. Not everyone has resigned. But I think it really connects to what you're talking about with the Met Police. Like, I think that there may be people who resign because they feel that the inquiry isn't going to talk about race. Only one person has mentioned that. But actually what people are saying is they don't trust the police and social services because they consistently let them down. And I think that's completely legitimate. If we look at the statistics from people who report to the police, especially when they are women who are survivors of abuse or violence, consistently people's experience is negative. Cases get a long time to get heard. People rarely get prosecuted or arrested. Often the experience of reporting a crime is re-traumatizing. And I think that because there's political hay to be made, because Kemi Badenoch can ask PMQs, and because, you know, the Nigel Farages of the world will want to use it to bang their same old drum about Keir Starmer, we're actually losing something which is quite important, which is that these women have been consistently let down by the police. And I think it's reasonable to say, I don't want a cop running this inquiry, especially when you think about some of the experiences that survivors had when they tried to report and were told that, you know, they were prostitutes. And I think it really connects with, it's not the Met Police. This is just more broadly an objection to police. But I think that I think it's a really good example of how often the people who've survived and experienced this abuse aren't centered. And I think that the government response has been quite tin-eared because it's like, oh, well, this is how we normally do things. And this is what a typical inquiry should be. And it's like, well, how we normally do things doesn't work. And I think these women are right to raise that they don't want the people who were complicit in their abuse to then be investigating the abuse. And I think it kind of connects to what you're saying about who gets to investigate wrongdoing and who's sort of holding these like arms of the state to account. The story is sort of unfolding this week. More women have resigned since the first resignations. But my guess is, and from everything that has been said, is that, you know, this is an inquiry that came about because of political pressure. The government didn't wake up and say, we need another inquiry. They were facing like social media and media pressure. And I think because it's a politically motivated inquiry, I think it's pretty credible that the government is kind of politically trying to control and engineer what happens. A lot of the processes of like consultation or incorporating people with lived experience are, how can I say it, like are lacking. And anyone who's responded to a government consultation will know that. There are two panels of about 20 survivors. And my guess is, you know, politicians are running it. They are kind of managing the process because they don't want it to look bad. But they're dealing with people who have experienced so much trauma and so much injustice that they're not willing to be sort of sidelined or pushed to the side. It's hard to know without talking to the women, but I think it is, I think it's really about the nature of what led these women to be on the panel. I guess once you've experienced that, then maybe you're not really willing to sort of put up with nonsense or being sidelined. I mean, the other thing is that this at least was pitched as something where survivors were going to be in control and that things were going to be done differently. And, you know, these are women who experienced sexual abuse when they were like 12, 14 years ago. And maybe it's just like a sense of exhaustion and just like, no, like I'm not hearing it again. I don't know. What do you think? You've reported a lot on government inquiries.
Yeah, no, it seems to be a classic case of the government seeking to cut corners and dodge accountability and ultimately failing victims and people whose voices and perspectives should be centered, people for whom justice hasn't been achieved. I think that is a shame that it took, you know, the women taking a stand and raising their concerns and walking away, because ultimately there is a duty of care on the part of the government and those at the helm of power, police, to these victims. But it's not surprising that it's come.
This is sort of, I don't know if it's an irony and it's hard to find anything about this entertaining, but like, given the political backstory to this, you would have thought the government would have really been on it and trying to make sure that it had credibility. and it smacks of like incompetence at best and something more sinister at worst. As far as I'm aware, the main concerns were some people were concerned about the scope being widened from grooming gangs, and some people were concerned with police and social workers being in the chair position or in senior roles. And those don't feel like unreasonable requests. This came about because of an Elon Musk tweet. And I think it's a very reasonable request from survivors to say, we don't want people running these services and who've come up through these systems that let us down to be in control. I mean, I think the other thing to say that is a bit broader and less about these women's concerns is like all the data we have suggests that most people who are perpetrating, I mean, the technical term is group-based CSE, but like offenders are most commonly white. And part of the problem of having an inquiry that's been set up in response to like an Elon Musk post and right-wing tub thumping about racism is that the reality is Black and Asian offenders are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Black, Asian, and minority victims and survivors find it much harder to get justice and, if anything, are overrepresented. And most people who are running or participating in grooming gangs are white. That's just a fact. We don't even get into that because we're stuck in this weird kind of political point scoring where rather than actually trying to deal with the big structural issues of how many women and girls in this country have experienced abuse or violence, horrific numbers that, are not going down, because the starting point for this was politics and point scoring, then it's kind of ended up in that world. And we're not going to get a fair hearing for victims and survivors or like an honest assessment of what is actually going on. How many times do we have to be told about how terrible the Met is to see some action? This report, because it serves far-right actors like Tommy Robinson, it serves political opponents of the government like Kemi Badenoch. I'm sure Nigel Farage will be wading in. Let's pray Elon Musk doesn't get back onto X. But like, it serves a particular right-wing agenda to weaponize this, and so it will be weaponized. But like, ultimately, it's on the government for not constructing a space that was safe for survivors or for listening to what feel like pretty valid concerns. So yeah, I don't know. I think this has all come from optics, and the optics are already bad. So now it's sort of been discredited before it's begun. I don't know how you save that. But I think that for those of us that are kind of on the left, it is still worth engaging with and like hearing what these women have said. When we have the epidemic levels of abuse and violence that we do in this country, like we can't say that services like the police and social services, there may be well-intentioned people in them, but like they are structurally failing women. So why should they be in charge of like fixing it? So yeah, I guess I'm pretty pessimistic about this. I think it will become, we've already had people saying that Jess Phillips needs to resign. It's come up in PMQs. So like, I think it's now just going to become a shouting match. And I don't know if these women are even going to be heard. Like they're already, I've already read one comment piece that's like taken a tiny little bit from what the survivors have said and gone on a rant about, the usual racist nonsense. So yeah, it feels pretty tragic.
Yeah, no, it is a shame. And I don't hold that much hope that anything, positively tangible is gonna come out of this. There's a saying that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And as you said, there are parallels between my under and the Met Police and the rife institutional and structural issues there, and a failure to learn lessons.
Another thing that I think is a bit of a dotted line between the two is people in power not being able to hear criticism of them and like really hear and understand what people are saying. Like whether it's the Met Police burying their heads in the sand and like suppressing reports, or, a big challenge, I think, when this story first broke before the inquiry was announced, Jess Phillips and Keir Starmer both see themselves as people who are champions of women's rights and who have done a lot for victims of violence and abuse. And I'm not questioning their professional records. I don't know enough about what they did at the CPS or before they were MPs, but I think that there was that self-narrative of like, well, I protect women and girls and I've, done things to deal with rape and abuse, has made them like unable to hear when people are saying that they're lacking or criticizing them. And I think that is another theme for me around just like people in power not being able to hear what people are saying about their lived experience of sort of dealing with them and the systems and structures that we have. So my under the radar is similarly depressing, just to warn you.
Okay. Thank you for the heads up.
Have you heard about Tommy Robinson in Israel?
I have.
Okay, so it's my under the radar because I don't think it's been picked up a lot. Channel 4 News went and filmed him, but Tommy Robinson, far-right activist, journalist, apparently, has been on an all-expenses paid trip to Israel, paid for by the Israeli government. And specifically, he was invited by the Israeli diaspora minister, who invited him, get this, after the terror attack on the Manchester synagogue, and said that Robinson was a courageous leader on the front of against radical Islam and a true friend of the state of Israel, a true friend of the Jewish people. Part of me thinks, like, let's not talk about Tommy Robinson, but he did just get 100,000 people to turn up in London at his Unite the Kingdom rally. And I think the thing I wanted to call attention to, as I say, Channel 4 News and I think The Guardian, a couple of people have picked this trip up. But he went out, he visited some sites in the West Bank. He did an event in Tel Aviv, which, I mean, his hour-long talk is on YouTube, where he says he's a journalist and he's coming to sort of, tell the truth about what's going on in Israel. I don't recommend you watching the speech or anything like that. But I think a couple of things I wanted to highlight are, like, number one, there is documented evidence that Tommy Robinson is an anti-Semite. In 2022, he wrote an article called Tommy's Statement, The Jewish Question, on a website called Urban Scoop, which has since been taken down, but luckily it's the internet. People read it before it was taken down, where he says there are influential Jews, self-declared Zionists who control the levers of power in entertainment, big tech, mainstream media, and governments. He also, in the same piece, claimed that Jews, at least European Ashkenazi Jews, have an average IQ of 110. Both wild comments, both pretty anti-Semitic. And as recently as this month, in response to British Jewish organizations objecting to him going to Israel as like an invited guest, so the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council, both said that he was a thug who represented the very worst of Britain. His presence undermines those genuinely working to tackle Islamic extremism and foster community cohesion. So a bunch of British Jewish groups objected to him going, and his response on X in a video, so this hasn't been taken down, it's still online, he says, the elitist Jews, the ones who are not representative of the entire community, the woke, liberal, elitist Jews, they don't represent all Jews. And like, I think I just want to call attention to how wild things have become. That, and I'm not the first person to point out, Rachel Shappy's brilliant book about anti-Semitism goes through this in much more detail, how you can support the state of Israel and be an anti-Semite as long as you're supporting Israel. I think it's important to draw attention to it because so many people have been accused of anti-Semitism for speaking out on Gaza. Meanwhile, this actual anti-Semite has been flown to Israel to give a talk to everyone. Just, yeah, got my goat, got me annoyed.
Of course, and I'm sitting here shaking my head with just thinking, journalist, what qualifies him? Do you know?
Yeah, so that bit is even more wild. So like he's rebranded himself as a journalist. And the reason I sort of this came up was because there was a Channel 4 correspondent in Israel who turned up at his rally and tried to film people who were going in. Like it was there were some Israeli people, there were some British Jewish people who were living in Israel. So like mix of people talking about how excited they were to see him. There was one valiant heckler who stood up and said he was a racist and got like forcibly removed from the event. But Tommy Robinson made a point of like being really hostile to the Channel 4 News reporter. You can imagine the normal stuff of like, you're just spreading lies. No one believes you anymore. And then he was like, I'm a journalist. In fact, he had a weird sort of video that he played during his talk to prove he was a journalist with all of the documentaries and films that he'd made. And I imagine that's annoying to you, an actual journalist. But yeah, it was an interesting like repositioning of himself as like, oh, I'm just coming to bring the truth to people in the UK because we don't know what's really going on. And I thought that was another like sort of sinister and weird element of this, that a man who can make absolutely no claims to being unbiased or objective, is positioning the work that he does as journalism, attacking actual journalists. He had people around him who were like filming the Channel 4 News reporter And there was definitely kind of a lot of hassling and like jostling of them. And I wondered what you thought about that as an actual journalist.
Yeah, no, it's deeply insulting. But more than that, really worrying. It's obviously a calculated move, uh, geared towards giving him this unwarranted veneer of respectability. He needs to be called out in general at every turn. I'm really glad that we're discussing Tommy Robinson as part of this episode and his shenanigans. People need to be vigilant.
And I think it is another, for me, the other thing that I really thought about this story is this, like, it's just this kind of thing of like, your enemy's enemy is your friend. Part of the reason that Tommy Robinson is being embraced by, at least some figures in the Israeli government is that he is anti-Islam, right? He's campaigns against Muslims and Islam as a religion. And so it's this kind of like, oh, well, he's against the things that we're against. And he'll say, horrible things about Palestinians and about Hamas. So he's on our side. And like, there's limited use of that logic, but I think it is worth us seeing and remembering that as anti-racist campaigners and people who care about discrimination, of like, if Tommy Robinson is allying himself with the Israeli government and being a full, pretty problematic anti-Semite and flying out to Israel to make his journalistic videos, I think it's like a good reminder to all of us that like these are the discrimination that lots of us face in our different communities are connected. And right now, the connections and the solidarity seems to flow really strongly between different far-right groups. I mean, even to the extent of the Hungarian president, Viktor Orban, who's pretty anti-Semitic, another person who's been embraced by the state of Israel. And like, I don't believe, your enemy's enemy is your friend, but I do think that if Tommy Robinson's out in Israel, that's a pretty clear message to us and kind of where he stands.
Yeah, and I think it highlights the importance as well of being organized on the left and as anti-racists and as people, working towards the enfranchisement of all of us. It's important to be organized and to work together.
Okay, so that's my depressing ones. What's flown under your radar this week?
So my under the radar is about Black History Month. It's been hella quiet this year. I've been having conversations with people, not just within my circle, family, friendship groups, etc., but people beyond about Black History Month. And there is a consensus that so far, of course, the month isn't finished, but so far it's been quiet. The energy feels muted. There's fewer events, fewer features. There's less of an emphasis on Black History Month and a noticeable pullback from institutions. That's what I've noticed anyway. And as I say, I'm not alone in this. So just to give a bit of context for listeners who may not know about the origins of Black History Month, it was launched in 1987 by a group of people, including Akiaba Ade Sabo. And he and others decided to launch Black History Month in the UK. We celebrate it in October, of course, in the US, Canada, and elsewhere. It's in February. But it was created to celebrate Black contributions and challenge historical erasure. Fast forward to 2025, as I say, the energy feels muted, and compare it with 2020, 2021, be it the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd's murder in the US and all of these pledges of solidarity that we saw from organizations and institutions and allies, and just the interest that seemed to be there around Black history, Black achievements, Black lives, it's no longer the case. Part of it is about budget cuts, as I understand it. Part of it is the wider divestment from diversity, equality, and inclusion efforts. But it also reflects a cultural fatigue, I think, with anything explicitly Black focused, and that's a problem. The irony is that at a time when racism, migration, and inequality dominate headlines, and we're seeing, the Tommy Robinson, racist march that took place a few weeks ago. We saw the racist riots that took place last year. We've seen an upsurge in hate crimes, race and religious based hate crimes around the UK. The 1 month dedicated to context and reflection around Black lives and experiences and achievement is being sidelined. It feels like this country's quietly rolling back its commitment to remembrance and progress. And it's alarming, as I say, when you place that in the context of what's going on. Yeah, there's reason to be concerned, but I will say that it is the responsibility of, just speaking from a Black perspective, of Black people within our communities to keep the momentum going and to keep on having events and being in community where possible, and highlight the importance of Black History Month and observe it within our individual spaces and capacities.
Yeah, and like it's a really good under, and I've noticed as well, like I've sort of sense of like it's been quite quiet. And yeah, I think there's a few things that come up for me with that. Like one, it does feel like it's a bit of a casualty, as you say, of like the rollback on DEI and the like war on woke, which, let's be honest, is like a not that subtle and coded war on Black and brown people, multiculturalism. And yeah, it's almost like the sort of chilling effect of Trump being elected, the rise of like right wing and far right people have almost like, oh, well, we're sort of done with that now. And I guess for me, there's like, as you say, one, we have to like notice it and pay attention to it. And then two, I guess it does also raise some questions about how events like this, months like this, which have a really political origin, right? Black History Month was not about supermarket displays or a theme for like the company HR team to observe. It wasn't about an email signature. It was about not letting our history be whitewashed. It was about saying this is where like we have come from as a community, and like this is our history both in this country and around the world. So it is like inherently a political thing, and maybe part of the challenge of it being a bit mainstreamed in the past is then that when the mainstream shifts, then suddenly, as you say, like the little support there was for it is gone. And that for some people, it was maybe more of a like window dressing, fashionable thing and less of like a serious reckoning with like all of our history, really, because Black history is everyone's history. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess that means we have to like put even more energy into celebrating Black history.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And every day, I mean, for me, my friends say the same thing, and people who I know, Black history is 365 days of the year, 366 on a leap year. So nothing changes around here. But yeah, it's worth
I know you're
noticing.
I know you're a South London as well. That's what the Black Cultural Archives used to have as their sign, like Black history every day of the
Yeah,
year.
no, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really good under because it's funny. I've been to a couple of, just in the last month, I've been to a couple of like gatherings of Black professionals. So like the Black Writers Guild, and I was involved in delivering some workshops for the Black Designers Guild. So it was all junior and mid-career Black designers and researchers. So I've been to a couple of gatherings where it's been all Black people, or mostly Black people. That sense of needing a space, like more than ever, came up at both of them, kind of directly or indirectly. This sense of like, we're a bit under attack, we're a bit under siege, shit's getting real, came up at both of those gatherings. And I think I left both of them feeling like the Black Writers Guild had a whole panel on the rise of the far right. And I was a bit like, do I want to see this? Like, am I just going to leave depressed? But actually, it was Diane Abbott and Gus Jong and Simon Willey and Dawn Butler. And it was really uplifting because also it was just a space where people were able to be real with like what was going on and speak frankly about how bad it is. And yeah, it actually felt more important than ever to be somewhere where you're like, oh, my reality is being validated and we get how hard it is. And we're also not giving up. So yeah, it feels like we need it more than ever right
We
now.
do, we do. It is incredibly affirming to be in those spaces. Over the weekend, last weekend, I attended and spoke at the UK reparations conference.
Oh yeah, we had Bel Rivera Addy on
Yes.
a couple of weeks
Okay.
ago.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
How
she was
was it?
amazing.
How was
Yeah,
it?
no, the conference was really good, and lots of insightful discussions. One key theme that came up several times throughout the day was the importance of being in community and having these spaces, these safe spaces to have discussions around, the lived experiences of Black people, African heritage people, and also within these spaces, there can be further discussion about reparations, what that looks like, what it means, as well as, broadly speaking, opportunities to have have other discussions as well, and just to regroup and as I say, be in community. So that was nice. It was nice to be there, nice to catch up with people. There are events taking place, throughout Black History Month and beyond. Shout out to Nels Abbey. He puts an event called Uppity at Rich Mix in Shoreditch, I
I
believe.
keep meaning to go, and I still haven't been yet. What happens? What's it like?
Yeah, so he has debates around topical issues, affecting Black and minoritized communities. Normally, he will interview someone as well, about someone who's doing great work in their respective fields in front of the live audience. There's the opportunity to network as well after those discussions and the debates. There's opportunities for audience members to get involved in conversations as well. So it's really, really good. So yes, despite the muted energy from a mainstream perspective around Black History Month, it is heartening to see events like Uppity, events like the UK Reparations Conference.
Is there anything else you think people should listen to or read for Black History Month?
Yes, Spiral Children Part 2, The Echoes of Separation, will be coming out soon. I'm aiming for some time around the middle to end of next year. So people should definitely look out for that. Also, I'll also be announcing a special project that looks at the history and the present relating to Black media in Britain. So that will be a Black History Month special. It's my birthday this week as well, so I'm dropping it as a gift to all of us. And I think a lot of people.
We should be giving you a gift for your birthday.
Well, more than welcome to. I won't say no, no, but it's been great to be on this show with you and have this conversation. That's a gift. So thank you, Carys.
Yeah. And you're right. It's really nice to end on all of the great spaces that there are and like the things that people are doing. And we'll definitely link to some in the show notes. So thank you, Nadine, so much for hosting the show. You've been brilliant. Where can people find you and your work now that you're not at the Independent? Where can people follow you?
Well, people can follow me on Instagram. That has recently become my main social media platform. And I say that as somebody who was an avid user of Twitter. I feel better when I'm not on Twitter as much as I used to be. So Instagram's my main platform. So it's at Nadine, Nadine _rights, WRITES. I'm also on TikTok, but I should say I've just launched my website. So feel free to check that out. And people can contact me via that website. It's www.nadinerights.co.uk. And let's link up. Let's keep the conversations going. Thank you.
And everyone remember to go and sign up to read Blackcurrant News. So thank you so much for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. Please remember to like, subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support us on Patreon or upgrade your support, you can go to patreon.com/Over the Top, Under the Radar. You can follow us on social media at over_under_pod_. See you next week.